Fala aí, Disconnectors, esse aqui é um corte da live Disconecta.
Quase que esse aí vai antes da manhã, hein? Mais um pouquinho. Então tá, o vídeo que a gente vai assistir agora é Why KRAFTWERK are more influential than the Beatles. Uma tradução livre, porque o KRAFTWERK é mais influente que os Beatles.
Um patrocínio da Vlut, é o novo clube de disco de vinil feito para você. Acesse velut.com.br, faça seu perfil e escolha o seu plano. Todo mês receba um disco surpresa novo e lacrado, com gift exclusivo, caixa personalizada e frete grátis. Vlut, um clube realmente seu.
The Beatles or KRAFTWERK.
It's a musical earthquake. German band KRAFTWERK have been hailed the electronic Beatles. International press articles suggest that KRAFTWERK may be more influential than the Beatles. This film is about KRAFTWERK's mission to drag music and culture into the modern era. Join us as we go back to the future to explore the roots of the band in the German city of Düsseldorf.
To me, the only question is when, where, and why.
Ó, deixa aí nos comentários, o que vocês acham? Beatles ou KRAFTWERK?
Why KRAFTWERK are more influential than the Beatles?
A provocative proposition. Let's put it to the test. Doesn't what you're about to hear sound a bit like techno years before the genre really emerged? The audience didn't know how to react to the new sound. Some were enthusiastic. Others clearly bemused. Early KRAFTWERK featured founding members Florian Schneider-Esleben on flute and Ralf Hutter on keyboards. They were German prog rockers playing experimental music known as Krautrock. In 1974, they unveiled a new, almost completely electronic sound. Autobahn was a hit around the world.
Que disco, né? Puta que pariu. Isso é bom demais, meu. Isso é bom demais.
This is where that sound was born, the Kling Klang studio. The electrician company's sign acts as a decoy for the secret location. According to legend, the only phone was to communicate with the front gate. This was the KRAFTWERK laboratory, one of the most revered spaces in music history. We met up with Rudi Esch, author of Electricity, the Düsseldorf School of Electronic Music.
Autobahn is recorded with Conny Plank coming in his VW van with his mixing desk, parking here, putting the cables into the studio, recording Autobahn, going back to his studio, and then doing the mixing. If you remember Ralf and Florian, on the backside, that is again here. So this one room on the backside of Ralf and Florian, which is so influential to everyone in England.
Michael Wenzel and Sven Andre Dreyer are the guides on the Sound of Düsseldorf tour. They wrote a guide to the city's unique contributions to music. KRAFTWERK, they say, emerged from a communal cultural scene specific to the city on the Rhine. But Düsseldorf's most famous musicians shut themselves off to rethink music from the ground up.
They just wanted to create new sounds, and they defined new sounds by using synthesizers.
I was not a good violinist and only a moderate flute player. And a synthesizer, if you have a bit of intuition or you let things happen. It can be a very flexible and pliable instrument.
Then they said, okay, this comes from the American people, this comes from the British people, but we should develop something on our own.
They developed a new sound that was blinking, shrinking, bleaking, peeping.
They are
Gênios, velho, gênios. Olha o que é isso, cara. Imagina, meu. Nessa época, fazer um som assim. É uma coisa que a gente... Eu não gosto de falar muito nisso, porque acaba soando meio saudosista, né? Mas é uma coisa que a gente perdeu, esse tipo de arte, né? A busca por uma arte, por um diferencial, por um ponto de vista musical, que a gente não encontra hoje em dia, né? Parece papo de velho, mas... o nível que esses caras estavam, em termos de experimentalismo musical, uma busca por algo, por arte, é muito diferente.
not influenced by anyone. They don't pick up any music they like and make a mishmash or anything. No, it's like, I mean, they're sitting there like Thomas Mann. They only have pages and a pen, okay? But they have the imagination. They can come up with a great album, and they are only in their own circle.
All those creatures' sounds were very, very important to create a future sound, because there were no footprints in the snow, and they were the first musicians using those instruments.
And the Fab Four? The Beatles didn't really create a new sound on their own. They were part of a movement of beat groups playing blues-based rock that built on the work of black US artists. This round has to go to KRAFTWERK. KRAFTWERK actually developed new instruments themselves. They built and commissioned the various elements they needed for their new sound, including DIY drum pads. Early examples were more primitive looking than futuristic. Robot vocals became their trademark sound. The success of Autobahn provided the necessary capital to forge ahead of the competition.
They had the money to afford big studios and high-tech equipment to realize their vision of sound, what modern music should sound like. And also this, until today, makes them timeless.
No one knew by the time that Wolfgang was like playing his self-made drum kit that this will be the top future for everyone, that it's a cool thing to play electric drums.
KRAFTWERK couldn't wait to embrace new technology, so they created their own. And what about the Beatles? They too liked to experiment. They sped up vocals and played sounds backwards.
Pouco tendencioso, né? Pouco tendencioso esse roteiro aí, né? Eles botaram só as músicas ao contrário, né? Aceleraram, né? Porra, meu, eram os Beatles, brother. Mas o que esperar, né, da televisão alemã, né? Óbvio que o cara não ia elogiar os Beatles, né?
But this was the exception rather than the rule. Round 2 to KRAFTWERK. By the mid-70s, KRAFTWERK were a four-man band. Ralph and Florian had been joined by classically trained Karl Bartosz and former beat band drummer Wolfgang Flür.
They buy the equipment and they know we have to come up with something that is totally our own thing. But then they need help. So they asked Wolfgang if he wants to be the drummer, because he was the good-looking guy. He looked great and he could play. And he loved Ringo Starr. So he plays simple and just the beat. And Karl is a real trained and studied musician. Okay, that is a smart move to hire Karl.
Wir standen so in einem Kreis.
We stood in a kind of circle, Florian, Ralph and me, usually a triangle, and improvised. Like jazz musicians, we looked at each other, fell about laughing, and then recorded it.
The third aspect, to do pop music with new sounds, danceable pop music, for example, like The Model. Wolfgang and Karl had those lovely rhythm section.
The sound.
Puta, me deu uma puta vontade de ter os discos dos caras agora. Que merda, por que eu fui ver esse documentário? Deu uma baita vontade, imagina. Coleçãozinha completa do KRAFTWERK. Sentar agora ali no sofazinho. Levantar o tampo do toca-disco. Pegar o vinil. Escolher um deles, né? O cara tem a coleção inteira. Tirar ele, cheirar, né? Botar ali. Que delícia, meu. Que delícia. Que vontade animal de ter os discos, cara.
On its own, it's very romantic. You get the glimpse of the eternal beauty of the model walking down the strip, walking down the Königsallee.
Autobahn and The Model were big hits. They proved that Kraftwerk's electronic folk music had mass appeal and ensured that their future sounds went around the world. Let's get back to the Beatles, pioneers of perfect pop with multiple iconic hits. Before the Beatles, artists recorded songs written by professional songwriters. The Beatles wrote their own material and inspired thousands of young people to form bands, including, by the way, both Karl and Wolfgang from Kraftwerk. Round 3, to the Beatles. Kraftwerk were heavily influenced by Dusseldorf's vibrant art and design scene. Emil Schult is often referred to as the fifth Kraftwerk member. He was largely responsible for the visuals, creating much of the cover art. Schult studied at the Dusseldorf Art Academy under Gerhard Richter and Fluxus artist Josef Beuys.
Many artists from the Art Academy had a huge influence on music. Kraftwerk were in the scene of young students around the academy. So they had big and huge influences of arts. They were friends to, for example, very important artists from Düsseldorf.
We come from the late 60s art scene in Düsseldorf and have always been a combination of visual arts, music, sound, poetry. Our music has always been a living performance.
Now we're here at Berger Allee number 9. In 1974, the down floor was rented by Ralf Hütter as a shared apartment for members of the band. For example, the percussionists Wolfgang Flür and Karl Bartos lived there, and also Emil Schult, the artist. They had a commune there.
Kraftwerk were inspired by the art and activism of the 1960s. Florian Schneider-Esleben, seen here at an exhibition with his father and sisters, came into contact with the art world at an early age. His mother, Eva Maria, was a poet. His father, Paul Schneider-Esleben, a renowned architect who designed Cologne Airport and left his mark on the Dusseldorf skyline.
We're now here at Berger Allee 25. And there's this wonderful building which was the center of Mannesmann. And this building, very futuristic, was built up by and designed by the father of Florian Schneider-Esleben from Kraftwerk, Paul Schneider-Esleben. And he was a very famous architect, very futuristically thinking, a modernist, and he built up this building quite at the River Rhine.
In 2012, Kraftwerk played at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, confirming their status as art and music pioneers. This is a group of artists who consistently worked in the field of tension between man and machine, who in their work, in the visualization in performances, have increasingly replaced themselves with robots. The concerts were a critical success.
The visuals were incredible. I've seen them once before, but not in the 3D like that. It's unbelievable.
I just love the music. I love the space. I love the. They just look great. I mean, they've been around since the 1970s, and they looked awesome.
It was much more than I expected, and it was wonderful.
KRAFTWERK's entire oeuvre was beginning to be seen as a single work of art. But the Beatles were no art Philistines either. John Lennon was an art student and teamed up with Fluxus artist Yoko Ono for art happenings. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band was a concept album, cover courtesy of pop artist Peter Blake. But the Beatles dabbled in art without turning themselves into a unique Gesamtkunstwerk. KRAFTWERK's music workers take the round. Listen carefully, the word correct is a sample. A Dusseldorf waiter lent his voice to the track. KRAFTWERK were early adopters of sampling. Sampling exploded in the 1980s. When it did, KRAFTWERK's recordings became a toolkit for producers creating new tracks. Africa Bambaataa clearly borrowed from Trans-Europa Express. Suddenly, everyone was dancing like robots. From this to this. KRAFTWERK brought the funk with machines and computers. They might not have thought they were doing funk, but they were doing funk.
If you listen to the records from the early 80s and the late 70s, you listen to very, very cool rhythm sections. And that's the platform, the blueprint for techno. The Americans used those drum patterns to create that sound. They just put it in the loops, and then you have techno.
If the use of snippets of a band's work to create wholly new genres is the currency, then KRAFTWERK surely have the edge. But in terms of covers and cover bands, the Beatles are streets ahead. They are actually also way ahead of KRAFTWERK in terms of numbers of samples.
Eu tava falando ali do Africa Bambaataa é o seguinte, cara, se a gente teve ali, né, o KRAFTWERK como uma puta influência pro que veio depois, seriam os avós, né, cara? O Africa Bambaataa, ele seria o pai aí do que a gente tem como hip hop, o eletro, toda essa galera. O Africa Bambaataa tem uma discografia e músicas incríveis aí, né? Se vocês não conhecem, acho que vale a pena dar um mergulho, principalmente pelo fator histórico, né? Ah, ok, não é o tipo de música que eu gosto e tal, mas ele tem uma importância histórica fora da curva também. Vale a pena. Vamos voltar aí.
So this final round goes to the Beatles. The final result, the Beatles 2, KRAFTWERK 3. Could KRAFTWERK really be bigger than the Beatles? The band's influence extends beyond hip-hop and techno to disco, electro-funk and new wave industrial. It can be heard on David Bowie's Berlin Trilogy albums. What I was passionate about in relation to KRAFTWERK was their singular determination to stand apart from stereotypical American chord sequences and their wholehearted embrace of a European sensibility.
Ó, opinião minha, tá? Melhor fase do Bowie é essa fase de Berlim. Ah, ok, tem lá o Stardust, tem Dokin Dok, tem vários outros discos bons. Mas aqueles 3 álbuns ali, o Low, Puta, eu esqueci o nome dos outros 2. Não vou me lembrar de cabeça. É a melhor fase do Bowie, assim, né? Mas aí é gosto musical, né? Cada um tem o seu. E opinião, né? Eu acho sensacional. O Low, pra mim, é uma obra de arte, cara. É aqueles álbuns que tu ouve... Eu não consigo... Quando eu começo a ouvir, é o tipo de álbum que eu ponho meio que no... Vou lá, fico virando ele, o disco o tempo inteiro. Eu não consigo parar de ouvir. É um álbum enigmático. Esse e o The Idiot, que obviamente foi gravado na mesma época, com o David Bowie, do Iggy Pop. São 2 álbuns que... Caralho, velho. Disco que tu não para de ouvir nunca.
Giorgio Moroder was clearly inspired by Kraftwerk. By the 1980s, in the music of British synth-pop groups like Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, New Order and Depeche Mode, the influence of Kraftwerk is self-evident. Generation involved in electronic music. Kraftwerk were the godfathers.
É muito legal esse conceito que eles têm na gringa, né? Godfathers, né? A gente fala aqui, né? Os avós, os bisavós, né? Lá é os padrinhos, né? Os padrinhos nada mais são, né? Na religião aí, né? Quem se batizou cristão, aí eles substituem os pais na falta deles, né? Então tem uma certa lógica, né? É que como a gente aqui no Brasil fala diferente, né?
And all the pop stars today use synthesizers to compose their music.
Isso é verdade, cara. Puta, agora o cara falou, né? Se tu pegar o mainstream, né, que a gente chama, né, os principais artistas aí, os caras não usam mais guitarra, não usam mais bateria, os caras usam sintetizadores. Faz sentido, hein?
Could be that Kraftwerk is more influential than the Beatles.
I think both are pop, and even Kraftwerk like the Beatles. And you couldn't say that one band of them is more influential than the other. The Beatles stayed with classical instruments. Kraftwerk just took another way. They went into the electronic side of pop. They created electropop.
They are more influential because they really created something brand new and very German.
What do you think when it comes to a new sound, artistic vision, and leaving a lasting cultural legacy? Do Kraftwerk rival the Beatles' influence? Is there more Kraftwerk or more Beatles in today's chart and club music? Tell us what you think in the comments. And
É óbvio aí, né, que fica claro que o Deutschland aí vai puxar pros alemão, né, pro Kraftwerk. Mas o que é certo é que as duas bandas tiveram muita influência, né, no mundo, né? Os Beatles são considerados a maior banda de rock do mundo, né? Kraftwerk entrou numa outra linha. Muita gente não gosta, até pelo cunho experimental que eles têm, né? Não é um som tão fácil de tu ouvir quanto tu ouvir uns Beatles, né? Compensação tem o que o cara falou ali, né? Hoje todos os artistas, grandes artistas do mainstream utilizam sintetizadores, artistas pop, né? Não tô falando do rock, né?